Now we have an hour's panel session, which is called Compliance in Focus, Enhancing Visibility and Payment Tracking of Cross-Border Remittances. So there's going to be 40 minutes of discussion, which is going to be moderated with our expert panelists, and then 20 minutes at the end of the session for questions from the audience. So for questions from the audience during that session, kindly put your hands up and the microphone will find its way to you. For those joining us online from around the world, please submit your questions via the Q&A button, which can be found on the right-hand side of your screen during any part of the panel, and the team will answer as many of your questions as possible at the end of the session. After the panel session, the team here are going to be, the panelists will be working their way over to the next room for about 15 minutes, where you can speak to them about any topics that arose from this wonderful panel. Okay, compliance in focus, enhancing visibility and payment tracking of cross-border remittances. We're going to be delving into the critical aspects of compliance and regulatory frameworks governing cross-border remittances. Now, this panel will emphasize the importance of enhanced visibility and precise payment tracking to ensure secure and transparent transactions. There'll be special focus on new challenges and advancements in the industry and how the payments landscape is adapting to meet global standards and improve financial integrity. Now, I am very pleased to introduce the panelists for today. The moderator is none other than Rob Ayers, Managing Director of America RemitONE. Rob has 25 years of experience in payments and remittance and is the MD of the Americas. He has led growth and operations at global firms and startups, founding FinTech Advisors in 2016, and specializes in US state licensing, regulatory programs, and banking relationships for money services business. Big round of applause for Rob. He's told me not to make any jokes about the US elections.
Take it easy.
No jokes this year. I've been chained.
It's true.
Next, we have Richard Spink. Richard is part of the GBG business development team and looks after channel partnerships. He's worked for the last 12 years in ID with GBG and Experian. Prior to delivering global ID verification partnership, he worked at American Express. A huge round of applause for Richard Spink. And we've already had our next panelist grace the stage earlier on. He is no stranger to this industry. He's a CEO of the Alfaris International Group, head of banking committee, ICC, Saudi Arabia. Osama Bukhar is an experienced entrepreneur with a background in IT and services, skilled in banking, credit cards, commercial banking, Islamic finance, and credit risk. A warm applause for Osama. And our final panelist is the CEO of BudPay. Etimbuk Bassey is the Chief Operating Officer overseeing operations and strategic growth. With expertise in fintech, he drives innovation and efficiency in payment solutions across diverse markets. A warm round of applause for Etimbuk Bassey. Rob, over to you.
Does the clock start now?
Clock starts right.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for sticking around. We've got an esteemed panel here, and I know your compliance questions will be dealt with. I'd like to start, we'd like to know our audience, so I'd like to ask one question. How many of you out there have compliance responsibilities, compliance training, or regulatory oversight? Show of hands. 1, 2, 3. Raise your hand. Come on, I know you. There you go. Okay, good, good, excellent. So, obviously, we have a list of questions here, but I'm going to start with a different one.
Sorry about that.
You good? Okay,
Yeah,
good.
yeah, we're good.
So when you think of the compliance regulatory environment that covers your region, your countries, whatever, what is one word, just one word that comes to mind for each of you that describes the situation today? It wasn't scripted, I know.
Complicated.
Complicated.
Exactly. Archaic.
Archaic. Mr. Bassey.
I would say complicated.
Yeah, my word is evolving. It's just constantly changing.
Yeah.
Not that it's getting any easier, right? It's getting more
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So the first question is for, that wasn't the first question. The second question is for everybody. How has the need for enhanced visibility in cross-border remittances reshaped compliance requirements, and what are the key drivers behind this shift? Yeah, please.
Okay. With visibility, it's how do you give visibility and meet regulation. So the key thing, people regulation wants visibility of who's sending what to whom and how much are they sending.
Right.
So where GBG works is on the compliance side in terms of identifying who's sending what to whom, and it's easier to identify senders than it is to identify beneficiaries.
Right.
But the way to identify senders is different in every country in the world. So there is a slightly nuanced answer to that question in terms of depends where you are as to how you'd answer that question. And it's, yeah.
Follow up to that, because you triggered the thing. So have you seen regulators more focused on the beneficiary, know your payout person more than used to be?
I think so, but I'm not sure how regulators want to solve that problem. Because
Right.
it's all very well to say, well, you need to know where the money's going. That's fine, but if that information isn't captured, it's very hard to find out where it's going.
It is.
So the funny thing is, regulators obviously are behind the curve in terms of what the technology can do. But equally, if you want the technology to deliver that, you're not going to have many customers. So,
Agreed.
So there's a balance.
Osama, how do you feel about that?
Sure. Everything is about supply and demand. So, when you talk about supply and demand in this aspect, we could see the visibility that we can see in the transactions that are flowing. The bar has been set at back in the 50s or so, and it's still used as a cap for transactions that need to be scrutinized or not scrutinized. And in ICC, and that was one of the major things that we just discussed in June when we had our global conference in ICC in Paris, at the headquarters, is that we're really advocating to increase that limit, because what was set back in the 50s, where it was like a $5,000 limit to scrutinize or like to deem a transaction as safe, is no longer valid. In 50s, $5,000 was a significant amount of money. Here, maybe it should be set, I don't know, at $50,000 or $100,000, whatever it is. So this is, again, evolving, as you said, and that's why I said it was archaic, because the gist of compliance is really, really old. And it's not changed. Yes, we want it to change, and there are some changes, but the underlying compliance rules and regulations are really, really old. And that's what we're advocating and to change.
Right.
And by saying supply and demand, because if I'm sending money to the US or to Ghana or to Guatemala, why is it any different, from country to country? So is it really about the country or about the individual or the entity that I'm sending money to? So that's where we're trying to evolve there.
It's fair. Mr. Bassey?
Yeah, so the challenge and the issue with this is kind of deeper. One step, if you do a deep dive on it, you realize, like about 4 months ago, the CBN, the Central Bank of Nigeria, did like an audit on all IMTOs in Nigeria, and they did some reviews on all the checks, transaction monitoring. To do sanction screening on your customers and all of that. Now, the reason why they are doing that is some of these markets, like Nigeria and Kenya, still have like terrorism issues, right? So there needs to be that deep dive and all of that. In terms of getting more information about customers,
Right.
you see, it's not just is both originating and last mile, right? Now the regulators are saying last mile, you must get the address,
Yep.
must get the name of the customers, you must get, that's why I said it's challenging, right? Because getting your partners to get that information, and they made it mandatory. So if you are sending reports today, you have to send the address of the customer that sent the funds to the beneficiary. You have to send the address, you have to send the name, you have to send. So it's kind of challenging, but I think what we've also done at BotPay is to advise customers and let them know why the regulator is asking for this information.
Yeah.
Because a lot of money laundering is happening, a lot of terrorism financing is happening.
Sure.
So we cannot slip over that.
Yeah, and I would tell you, there aren't a lot of Americans in the room, but I will tell you that my experience in the U.S. is that much more scrutiny about know your beneficiary, and not just regulators, but banks as well are asking for that, and they won't bank you if they don't think you can, to your word, cover that last mile effectively. So contrasts all over. Well, let's move on. What are the primary compliance challenges in achieving transparency and visibility in the cross-border experience? And what strategies can be employed to overcome them? Richard, why don't you start?
We touched on it before. The primary challenge is it's different in every country.
Yes.
So it depends on where you are, where you register your business as to, so where you register your business is obviously key. And if you register your business in a country where those compliance requirements are harder to meet, that will have an impact on your business. But so the first thing you need to do is, if you're running an MTO, is decide where you're going to register yourself. I'll give you an example. In Europe, if you register yourself in Ireland or you register yourself in Lithuania, the regulatory environment for running an MTO is easier than if you register yourself in Germany.
Right.
Because in Germany, the requirement for Know Your Customer is capturing a video. Now, it doesn't specifically state that in the regulation. It's the interpretation of the regulation has led most organisations in Germany running that process to use video first. So everyone uses video first.
Okay.
So that's a good example. But video first is obviously not a particularly scalable solution. It's the only choice you have if you're launching a business in Germany. But I wouldn't say it's a solution that will evolve to be a global solution to the problem of compliance, because it's not scalable.
Osama, you want to tackle that?
Absolutely, it's just the interoperability, and we would talk about interoperability in terms of technology, but really even the data is not standard, because what defines an address? What defines an address in Saudi Arabia is completely different than in the US or in the UK or somewhere in Nigeria, because like even within a country that evolves. Like, because I know from my country, we used to have just PO boxes, so. Right. What good is that, really? I mean, but then we moved into what we call a national address, and that was, again, driven by the government. So to really have a proper, because you won't be able to move and do anything without having a proper national address that is verified. And so then I know exactly, where a person is being addressed. And so that becomes an integral part of the KYC process. And so when you open a bank account, if you don't have a national address, you won't be able to open a bank account in Saudi Arabia. So you have to have and by the way, everything is digital. So even for me to have a national address, I need to be in a home, and like in my home, use an app, which is a government-based app, with a location that says, yes, I do live there. And then, there's a cross verification. So the whole process is just beautifully done. But how many countries do that?
Right.
Not many, right? And when Bassey was saying you need to capture the address, yes, I'm capturing the address. I can put boo, 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 and then that just, let the transaction go through. And then if the bank looks into that, then is that an address or not? I think this is where the issue is. And you're rightfully, spot on when you said, yeah, you need to capture the address. But what really consists, there isn't standardization of data itself.
Yeah.
Unless if we do that, then we're not going to be able to achieve that common ground.
Yep. Mr. Bassey?
So for me, I would say, I mean, I think compliance is really expensive,
Oh,
Expensive.
definitely.
extremely expensive. Because if you look at, I think that also informed our business division of doing last mile. Because if you look at cost of um, doing compliance on origination and also doing compliance on the last mile,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
It's really expensive.
Yeah.
So that's for me is a major challenge too. And in our meeting with the CBN governor in Washington 2 months ago, we had mentioned this and said, okay, what can the central bank do to ensure that what kind of costs do we need to reduce license costs every year? We pay license costs, we pay certain
Oh, yeah.
amounts. Can we just issue license and not renew every year? Things that could help us cut costs in terms of compliance, because compliance is really expensive. Do transaction monitoring, do sanction screening, do PEP screening. You still need to do address verification. All those things cost a lot of money.
Yeah. My guess
and,
is
and you can't sometimes if you try to transfer that cost to the customer,
Wow.
it makes the service even more very, very expensive.
Exactly.
So
yeah, and Leon knows that I challenged these World Bank figures that the average cost is 6.9%, and we'd all be happy if we could get 2 or 3%, right, in terms of margin. But what you've probably seen over the last decade or so is compliance as a percent of your total expense line plays a much bigger role than it did prior, and
True.
that probably
Yeah.
will change. Okay. So with increased scrutiny on international payments, how can financial institutions balance the demand for compliance with the need to provide efficient cross-border remittance services? So this has to do with banks and financial institutions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure. Again, it's a game that we have to play by, and it's a balancing act, because with increased compliance you have control. With less compliance, of course, you lose control, but then that goes with the convenience. So if I want the transaction to be convenient, I need to relax the compliance, but they really can't. I can't have high compliance and convenience at the same time. So what is that balancing act that we need to come up with so that transactions are efficient enough and secure enough? And as Mr. Bassey said, doing a scrutiny on the origination is far easier, because it's within the remitter's domain, and it's their customers, so they know what's going on. But then when you do it to the last mile, you have no control, especially for cross-border. Then you're only obligated to do whatever that you can, but there are other regulators that may deem what you do, because again, that's another problem. Whatever I deem to be okay in my country may not be okay in another country. So with data privacy and all of the things that happen, so even that is not easily achievable. And you could see that, and that's, by the way, that's what I would say cryptocurrencies came about. It's because they were fed up with the scrutiny and the expensive transactions that the banks are doing. It's not really because they really wanted anonymity and and to fund terrorism or what have you, because that's what happened as a side effect of the cryptocurrencies. But really, the origin of it, we only have ourselves to blame, because we just made it so difficult for customers, whether it's corporate or retail, to really transact in a comfortable way, but being scrutinized and choked.
Richard, do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I think it's very it's very hard because you can't get that last man. There is I work in our world, we're trying to provide customers with data to do that. Someone asked me earlier, actually, can you do last man? I said, I don't think anyone can do last man. Because in simple terms, unless you get name, address, date of birth and an identity document, how on earth are you going to do that? So there's the other answer to this in terms of is until there's become some sort of convergence around the idea that digital identity is the way to go, you don't get to solve the compliance problem. So blockchain or crypto is an attempt to try and do that.
Absolutely.
But governments are way behind where we need to be to try and get transparency into the process. The transparency that they seek, incidentally.
Right, that they seek.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right. Yeah.
So for me, I think because I think the regulators are still out of touch with the realities. I'm sorry, but
No, you're right.
but that is the truth,
That's true.
right? So I think more engagement needs to happen. Like in Nigeria now, they have a new director for trade and exchange. So there's that monthly engagement happening now.
Yeah.
We are sharing data, we are discussing, right? Just kind of educating because it's good to say it's not all about, okay, yeah, transactions are dropping or we need more money into the country and all of that. You need to also hear us. These are the challenges we are having.
Yeah.
And how can we work together to create a balanced ecosystem for everyone to operate?
So you're not big on regulators. So anyone online, we'll send you Mr. Bassey's email afterwards if you're a regulator and you can.
That's fine. Regulators are friends.
But Rob, and I'll tell you from experience again in Saudi, what the regulators in Saudi actually they actually do listen, and they do ask the financial sector, like SAMA, which is the central bank, or CMA, for the Capital Market Authority. Whenever they want to pass on a law, they actually draft something, send it to every single bank or every single house, and just give me your feedback, because they don't want to be disconnected. Because I'm a regulator and I think this is what's good for the business, and if more than one entity says, "Hang on, what you're doing is completely wrong," they do listen and they do change it. And then once that is done, then it becomes regulation becomes a rule.
Sure.
So I wish that everyone does that.
Yeah. The challenge we have in the U.S. is it's not just one regulator. It's 49, 50,
exactly.
52 different entities.
Exactly.
So you can imagine companies like Unitel and other multi-licensed companies. It's very difficult. And that's why their compliance team is so big and so expensive. So good. Thank you for that. So how can emerging technology like AI, blockchain, and machine learning, how can those be leveraged to enhance visibility and improve compliance in cross-border remittance tracking? Osama, you want to start with this one?
Yeah. Well, I have a bit to talk about. When you talk about AI, or when ChatGPT was mentioned, that can easily be influenced. So yes, the engine is beautiful. The usability is great, but it's all about the sovereignty and the accuracy of data. If your data is not properly managed, then, as they say, garbage in, garbage out. I'm a person who's, let's say, I'm well known in the financial sector, and I can talk about something and repeatedly bombard the internet with it. And then guess, when you talk about, you ask ChatGPT about something that I spoke about, they say, well, this is what it is. It wasn't real because I'm the one who influenced it.
Right.
So it's really difficult to really just take AI, although it's a beautiful engine, and just say, it will resolve the problem.
Right.
Unless you've cleaned your data, you made sure that the data is proper, then AI and what have you is just beautiful, because they kill the repetitiveness, and they just bring automation. They don't evolve. They don't innovate. Machines are machines. It just makes our life much easier. But it will be able to gather all the information. So if you put Osama Bukhari, and then there's 1,000 people called Osama Bukhari from different nations. So how are you going to tell the difference between this Osama Bukhari and that Osama Bukhari. One could be a terrorist, one could be a saint, and one could be, I don't know, a banker, and the other one is. And
And
so,
which one of those are you?
I'm all of them. So seriously, I mean, this is this is a problem. Like we say, AI is going to resolve all our issues. Yeah, it's a beautiful tool, but you really need to control your data.
I think AI wrote these questions now. Do you want to join
And
me?
answer them.
Yeah.
So for me, I think AI has a role to play. If you look at like transaction monitoring, it's basically rule-based.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, AI can help to reduce false positive, and I think AI can do a lot with, because you can like analyze historical data, right, and track patterns and things like that. I think AI can help with transaction monitoring, but when it comes to sanction screening, PEP screening, maybe not,
Well, it's being sold, and we work with lots of providers of that software. So we're a provider, but not an originator, as it were, in that space. And there's two things. There's the PEP sanction screening, and the biggest issue with it is no one wants to make the wrong decision, but everyone wants to reduce false positives. So how do you manage that? That's again, I haven't got an answer on that, but it's not easy. AI, we use AI in our business.
Yeah.
And we buy in software that is using AI. And the biggest danger is in terms of recognizing faces. So the sample set to recognize faces, when it was originally, as this is a famous story, when it was originally used, was not representative of the global population as a whole. So that needs work, as does we don't use AI in recognizing documents, but we'll use it to train in documents. So we'll use machine learning to say we need to recognize this document better than we have been. But again, it's early days. It's really early days with the software. And it's horribly dangerous to rely too much on it.
Oh, absolutely.
So you need an element of human intervention to make this stuff work. Yeah.
Don't you think we'll always need some element of human intervention? Yeah,
Hopefully.
right.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
I mean, the MLRO still needs to make the decision at the end of the day. So AI can do what it needs to do, but someone needs to make the final decision. Should this transaction go through or should it not?
No, that's fair.
Because you won't tell FCA or any other regulator that AI made the decision.
But it's all about expert systems. If you think about it, I mean, when I was at school, because I did computer science, and we learned about AI, and as you know, AI started back in the 50s. And I mean, does anyone know when was the first chatbot created? What year? Chatbot. 1966.
Wow.
It was called ELIZA. It was with Professor Joseph Eisenbaum. It was mimicking the in the University of Harvard, the psychologist. So students could talk to ELIZA, and they could have a full conversation with ELIZA. In terms of, so what has happened since 1966 until today? I mean, the underlying technology is there. It's what made it more apparent today is the computational power, because now the processes have become so powerful, and the availability of data. Because again, if there's no data, there's nothing that you can crunch. So when I talked about expert systems, it's still like you bring in compliance experts, and they need to feed that into the AI engine so that it can do its job properly. So I don't need to have so many people involved, but really bring an expert panel, and they become the source of the engine. But again, you have the problem with the data itself that needs to be sanitized and needs to be proper.
Correct. Okay. So how do international regulatory standards, that's including those that are required for anti-money laundering, AML, and counterterrorism, how do those standards impact the visibility and tracking of cross-border remittances? I don't even understand what I asked. So
I can. Well, I'll start. In simple terms, visibility is all about who's sending what to whom.
Mhm.
So if you strip it back, every regulator wants to know the same thing: proof of ID, proof of address.
Good.
But every regulator approaches the revelation of that information in a different way. So that's keep coming back to the same point: is it's not uniform and it's not applied in a uniform way globally.
Yeah. Oh, and it
And
never will be, will it, Richard? Can
well,
it
I don't
ever?
know. I don't know. That's nirvana, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or
something worse.
or something, yeah. But in theory, the technology is already
Right.
there.
Agreed.
The technology is already there, and Google or the big US internet firms and the Chinese equivalents will have all this information anyway.
Yeah, and I think that was where
it's
Osama
not
was talking
available.
about before.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's been there. It's just
Yeah.
how you mine it.
Yeah.
Right. And see, as Richard said, I mean, again, it's about interoperability and the standardization. So the international laws, like whether it's international transactions or the compliance or the the credits and all this and that. Yes, they put a work frame. And again, we mentioned, like, they would require an address. But what really constitutes an address? They don't tell you that. So it's just, I need an address.
Yeah.
Because they can't dictate what an address is because it's different from country to country.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, I mean, they're trying to bring more visibility, but it's just we live in a world that, we're all created differently. So it's not easy. I agree with Richard. It's a very, very difficult matter to handle.
Fair enough. Mr. Bassey?
Yeah, I feel that that's going to be very difficult because if we had like a centralized standard system like a SWIFT is standard, whether you're in Citibank in the US, Barclays in the UK, UBA in Nigeria, there's a simple single protocol, right? Until we have that, it's going to be very difficult to have like a global standard for all payment providers, remittance companies, in terms of, I mean.
It's hard to imagine. I don't know how everyone feels. It's hard to imagine. I mean, like in the States, you can't even get 50 states to agree on stuff. So how are you going to get
the whole world?
Exactly. So anyway, but no, I hear what you're saying. I'm cognizant of the time, so I'm going to jump down to one. I think this question I can understand it. Can you share some examples where enhanced visibility and payment tracking in cross-border remittances have successfully improved compliance outcomes and reduced risks? Some examples where more visibility, more payment tracking has actually improved your compliance tracking and control.
Again, if I would take Saudi Arabia as an example, or the Middle East in general, prior to, I would say, 2015 or so, there was so many ambiguous transactions happening, and because the compliance wasn't really up there, and there was some unintended terrorist funding because a terrorist will appear to be a legitimate business or an Islamic, let's say, good, like they're trying to help the Muslims around the world. And I'll tell you, if I came to every single one here and I said, there's this child that needs our help and needs to have an operation done, every single one of you will want to help that child. It's in us as human beings. I don't care what kind of ethnic background, religion, color, or whatever it is. We are all good from the inside. We want to help that child. What makes you scrutinize or that question that, hang on, is that really a child that is in need, or am I just faking this whole thing just to take the money and use it for something else? And that's what happened with compliance. So the more visibility that we have, now we can see, like, one of the major banks in Saudi really was almost going to lose its license because it was, in all kindness, wanted to support so many businesses, but then the government found out that they're really,
Right.
bad businesses.
Exactly.
So they almost lost their license. And you're talking one of the major banks. But now they revamped their compliance. Now they do a lot more. And now they're like one of the biggest remittance banks in the world. So yeah, these things happen. I mean, visibility is very important, but what do we do afterwards is really what counts.
Yeah. Yeah. Thoughts on that?
I think when you get things done properly in the compliance side, it makes it easy. Like when you have like investigations from the law enforcement, regulator. I mean, you could literally show this is what I've done from my end. I did all I could do on this transaction and all of that, and it kinds of help build some kind of credibility as a company, and I think that would be it for me. Yeah.
Anything, Richard?
It's harder because we get to see issues that companies have with compliance, but I suppose we've worked with customers who have come to us because they've had issues trying to provide visibility.
Yeah.
And in our space, that's what we're trying to do, is enable compliance officers visibility of why decisions are made. So that's something we do. I guess another good example is if you look at, we talked about the difference in regulation. So I'll just give you an example. So Revolut have just got their UK banking license. But what was interesting is Revolut had a banking license in Europe and Lithuania.
Right.
And they chose Lithuania because it was easier for them
Yep.
to get that banking license in Lithuania than it was. Again, I go back to Germany. I just don't get why in Germany everything has to be on a video, and that's my hobby horse. But it's clearly not. Well, it's fine. We all use FaceTime and things like that. But do you really need that when you're trying to open up an account to send to load a card with $100, for example?
But as operators, we're always going to go to the easiest.
So they'll go to the path of least resistance.
Exactly.
So not necessarily is that a success of regulation or not, but those regulators are still asking for the same things ultimately, which is proof of ID and proof of address. It's just they're asking for it in a different format to other regulators.
So I'm going to go to the last question. So you get to advise people, future leaders of the remittance world. What advice would you give emerging fintech companies and startups in this business looking to build a compliance framework that prioritizes visibility and payment tracking? What's the advice you'd give startups here in the audience, online, that you deal with, et cetera? What would you say to them?
Well, there's a technology that's evolving in the recent years, which is called observability. Observability platforms, honestly, is something like what I call insurance. You don't insure a car after you have an accident. You have to have insurance before you have the accident. And if you do it early on, it becomes less expensive and more effective. God forbid, when you need it, it's going to be there. So these observability platforms, they actually bring you and the regulators and everyone a lot of visibility for you to understand and know where the transaction is coming from or going to, whether it's on the transaction or the technology or even infrastructure. So they can always tell you, this router is about to go out, or this customer, because of the behavior that they're doing, that transaction doesn't make sense. Because at the end of the day, what's compliance? It's policing in a good way to make sure that everything is done properly. So honestly, adapt the concept of observability platforms, because I think that is going to be very effective.
Mr. Bassey.
I think for me, I will give my response from the operations perspective, right?
Yeah.
It will be to watch your cost.
Watch your cost.
Yeah, because look for partners in the early stage that are willing to work with you on the long term, right? Compliance partners, are willing to work with you on the long term.
Yeah.
And just watch your costs, because as you scale, can be a lot.
Good. Yeah. Mr. Richard.
I would just say understand your regulation. So understand your regulation and take advice on what it's meant to be, but understand it, because there is a nuance to it that needs to be understood. It's no good relying on a so-called software provider to give you what you want. You need to take more advice than that.
Spot on, yes.
Yeah.
I create a few of my own. Thought I'd share with you. Well, first of all, and we preach this a lot in the U.S., any MSB in the U.S. would preach this, that from the top, you need to create a culture of compliance where everyone buys in. Salespeople, operations, IT, senior management, board of directors, right? Mm-hmm. And second, and I think this goes back to Mr. Bassey, don't be cheap. Mm-hmm. It's expensive, it's intrusive, but you've got to have it. You've got to stay in the good graces of banks and regulators, or you're not going to be operating. And I got to read my writing. Oh yeah, not just with regulators, but you've got to build the relationship. We've got to build relationship with banks and regulators. Mm-hmm. An issue of trust, so that the chief compliance officer, they know that they're going to get the straight scoop and not what some sales guy might say. Want to add anything to that?
I mean, I've been an ex-banker, so I had a lot of fights with the compliance because, again, the compliance officer seems to be like he or she knows a lot, but they don't understand the business as well. So you cannot just tie my hands behind my back and say go swim.
Right.
No, I mean, tell me the boundaries and I'll work within those boundaries. And I truly believe that these compliance officers, they want the good for the organization, but sometimes they just become too tough that they become hindrance to the business itself. So I agree with Richard. We both need to understand each other. If the compliance officer understands the business that is more into the compliance, then we can reach a common ground.
In the U.S., and it's happening this week, there's a conference called MTRA, Money Transmitter Regulatory Association. What's really cool about it is they bring in regulators from all over all the jurisdictions, and they bring in money service businesses, as well as those of us who make our money off them. And but it's 2 or 3 days of it's seminars and panels, that kind of thing. But on one day, each state has its own table, and you go around to whatever state you're registered in and ask questions, and once again build that rapport that you need with the state, and it does wonders for the relationship. Yeah. So for what that's worth, Mr. Sajid, you're still awake, right?
Yes.
We have 19 and a half minutes. Is that where we're supposed to stop for questions?
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Okay, so what do we do now?
Stop for questions.
Okay. So I'm supposed to say, does anyone have any questions? Mr. Pavel.
Amen.
And by the way, the questions are directed to the panelists, not the moderator.
Of course. And
You can help.
hey, I'm Pavel Rusova from RemitPay, fintech company, and I was fortunate enough to start. Instead of going from hard copies to uploading them to the cloud, all my information already started on the cloud, with it being such a new company and all. But it was mentioned earlier as well. We don't, as a company, we don't own the customer's data. We just hold on to it. And now, especially what's happening with France, when in regards specifically to blockchain, when somebody says, you have to remove my information, it's kind of tough to go back into a blockchain. I mean, it's impossible. You can't go back and wipe the person's information. So I know regulators, they're behind on times and whatnot. Just a question, I guess, for the panel. Do you see blockchain as something that regulators look forward to adapting to, or do you think that there's something better than blockchain that they would prefer?
I mean, blockchain is nothing but a network. I mean, let's not give it more than what it is. See, everyone was talking about blockchain a few years back. You hardly hear anyone talking about blockchain anymore because it's just another network that is distributed ledger, and for the information to exist in it's an excellent thing. So it's like, how do you say, zero security. So everything is secure without securing it. But again, it's really about the user journey and the applications. If you talk about KYC, know your customer, it's a beautiful implementation or use case of blockchain. But again, when you talk about blockchain and remittances, that has not happened, although Ripple did a lot there, but again, it didn't pick up, it didn't happen. So blockchain is nothing but a tool. I mean, it's not something that's going to either resolve or not resolve our issues. It's just another tool, another network. It's really about us getting common ground. And if like when Rob was talking about, like unification or like having something across the board, just like when the banks decided to use IBAN, right? The international bank account number. So that formula, if we can find something similar to identity, to, and do that with the compliance. So then, with that IBAN, it can be different from one country to another, but at the end of the day, there's one way to verify whether this IBAN is correct or not, and be able to use it across the board. But again, go to the US and tell them IBAN and say, no, we're not going to implement IBAN.
True. Mr. Bassey, you want to tackle that?
Yeah, so the way I see it, I think some creativity can be used in this case. So instead of sending your customers' data through blockchain, which is almost like public knowledge because you can actually track and see those things, you could maybe create special IDs for transaction, but on your system, you match those IDs to the customer's information. So you totally separate what happens on blockchain, focus on the smart contracts and all of that, and separate your compliance and your customers' data from what happens on blockchain.
I think all I would add to that is that's the ultimate solution in theory is the digital identity token. So you just take the piece of information you need to confirm the identity, as opposed to creating multiple databases where everyone's got their personal identifiable information there. But which organisation globally is going to hold that central source? That's the issue, isn't it?
Of course.
And no one wants it to be Apple or Google, and no one wants it to be the US government. So it's really hard. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
But all the technology is there to do it already. It's just that the will is a way behind.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Good answers. Who else? Don't be shy. Nobody? How about online? Do we have any questions from an online group? Oh, there you are.
Question from Amit. What do you think is the latest trend in the RegTech space? Is it automated risk assessment or AI-based transaction monitoring or FIU reporting or something else?
It's using AI. I'll just answer that straight forward. So everyone talks about AI as though it's the sort of the golden egg that's going to solve everything, but I personally don't believe it is, because it's how do you, the solution I think is still around digital identity. So it's around governments going, okay, well, we need to solve this better than we're currently solving it, because at the moment we're still going back to your point there. We're just creating silos of lots and lots of personal identifiable information that crooks are just going to steal and use to create even more fraud, basically. But the RegTech space is all about, can you use AI to make stuff happen quicker and better decisions? So, at one level, yes, but it's a dangerous to be an early adopter of that technology. You've got to take a leap of faith.
True.
Gentlemen?
I mean, you're talking about digital identity. I mean, if we could just convert our passports into, a digital identity, you already have that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for any person other than the US, for you to travel, you need a passport. But then even passports have evolved from a simple book into now actually like with a QR code or like a barcode, and now really they're digital with smart SIMs and stuff like that. So I think that is just I would say the seed of a digital identity that can be used across the board, and I guess with the United Nations, if you want an entity that that just governs everything. So we can have that digital.
I mean, and in theory, to that point, the international travel is essentially governed by very old regulation around what a passport should look like.
Yeah, exactly. So
it's already there. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, fascinating.
So maybe because I have a little engineering background, I think when it comes to transaction monitoring, I think AI can do a lot when it comes to transaction monitoring.
Yes.
But when it comes to ID, I'm not sure about that. Yeah, because I mean, as of today, still like literally enter the rules, right? But if we can have a system that actually tracks all the pattern of transactions and can actually come up with some kind of results that can help you make informed decision, I think AI can do a lot when it comes to transaction monitoring. They're not sure about IDs and
See how it evolves. Other questions? Do you want a microphone? Yeah.
My question was, I keep hearing you say with the transactions, is there a way for someone to make a transaction without you identifying the remitter and the beneficiary? Because how do you send money if you don't verify, the remitter and the beneficiary in a system like that's like not. Now I'm from the U.S., but in other countries, Ethiopia, you still have to verify both before money can be sent. So even if you register the remitter, the beneficiary has to register too, and they have to go through the systems, where the systems that monitor for sanctions. So I don't understand what the issue is.
go ahead.
I'm not sure we said that. I think we also agreed that there is the originating side, and there is the beneficiary side, the termination side. So compliance is done on the originating side, and also done on the termination. That's why I said it's kind of expensive because you have to do both.
But it's compliance. It's not identification typically.
You're saying like after the transaction.
So when you do the transaction, you in theory you know your customer who's sending this, fine. Where are you sending it, and where is that, and who is that person? You don't typically, in my experience, find out who you're sending it to. You just send it to a bank account, a location, and you've got a name. But all you're doing is screening that name to see whether they've been a money launderer in the past.
Yeah, but you have to know both the receiver and the sender before a transaction can be sent.
Exactly.
Right, can't the sender be a synthetic? I mean,
well, they could both be synthetic identities,
so,
but the point being that the person who's receiving could be Joe Bloggs, and Joe Bloggs doesn't flag as being someone that you need to know anything about.
Right, but wouldn't both of them so the person who registers is not flagged, the person who's receiving is not flagged. We're relying on systems that flag. So what else can we do? If the government can't do that better than us, and we're tapping into OFAC and their systems, to
You can
track.
flag names with fraud. Various risk engines. Risk engines will flag
Right.
names that have been associated with fraud. But again, it's not our verification. It's just, actually, Joe Bloggs in Ethiopia is someone you need to be careful of.
Gotcha.
So before you release the funds, you might want to ask them a bit more information.
So you're saying, okay, from a compliance perspective, you have to go beyond what those infrastructures that have been provided to us to leverage. I mean, we do our best to ensure that the right people are sending and receiving. But if we're relying on the government's infrastructure and all the systems that you guys give us to flag, and those systems don't catch it, how does the little remittance company figure that out for you? I mean, and as long as you show that you did that your systems check, all the different solutions that are out there, then we should be fine. As long as we're really trying to be fine.
Do you want to jump in?
Okay. Go ahead, jump in, guys.
You can't get a credit card.
Here, speak into the microphone, please.
This is sort of like a credit rating agency problem. It's like you can't get a credit card unless you have some record of making payments. If there's no record of you, then then if a bank says, should I give this guy a credit card? The indication will come back from the credit rating agency, we have no record of this guy, so don't give him a credit card. So this is what happens with kids when they grow up, before they get a credit card with a decent kind of, ability to spend money, they have to prove that they can make payments.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The only thing I would say is, depending on the amount that's sent, is what raises the risk level. And there are standards, I'm sure, in every country that as the amount goes above certain thresholds, you ask for more. You ask for source of funds. Show me proof of where that money's coming from. So I think that's the short answer to the question.
Right.
Other questions?
We are on time. Thank you so much. Big round of applause for Rob, Osama, Richard, and Etimbuk. Thank you. Our panelists are going to be making their way over to the next room there for the next 15 minutes. They'll be available to continue that conversation or any other hot topics that you may want to pose to them. So thank you again. If you kindly make your way over to the room, I'm sure
we have another session right now.